What's going on, guys? Today we're gonna be talking about deadlifts, and more specifically, why most lifters should not deadlift in weightlifting shoes, and we'll talk about what to do instead. But do note, if you are a weightlifting athlete or an athlete that trains with weightlifting focused movements, you are exempt to this rationale provided in this video in a lot of ways, because a weightlifting shoe for you is a tool for specificity to your sport. So that all being said, let's talk about why deadlifting in weightlifting shoes is suboptimal for performance. So reason number one, and honestly like the most topical reason, is that when we wear weightlifting shoes and deadlifts, we're gonna add to the range of motion that we need to pull the weight. So the range that we need to pull the weight from the floor to our locked out position, we're going to add to it. Now a half inch or even an inch with what a weightlifting shoe would add to our deadlift may not seem like a lot. However, when we start getting heavy enough with our weights, deadlifts become a game of inches. They become a question of where can we optimize our technical proficiency to pull the most weight possible. If we're elevating the heel even a half inch to an inch, we're gonna shift mechanics slightly and add to the total range of motion we need to pull. And if you're pulling for reps, you don't wanna add a lot of range of motion to your pull, because an extra inch over the course of, let's say, like 16, 20 reps in a workout, that's gonna add up fast. But now let's talk about number two, because that's gonna dive a little bit more into the granular mechanics of what an elevated heel can do to your deadlift. So reason number two involves how an elevated heel will shift mechanics at the knee and hip slightly, especially when we're getting set up for the deadlift and when we start breaking the floor. So when we elevate the heel wearing a weightlifting shoe, we're gonna experience a bit more forward knee translation. So basically our heel is elevated, our knee is gonna wanna come forward a bit more naturally, and we're gonna feed into dorsiflexion more naturally, especially through different ranges of motion as we sit the hips down. Now, in terms of the deadlift, what is something we always need to consider and do? We need to clear the knees. We need to get the barbell from the setup position to a lockout position and create some level of straight-ish bar path to ensure we are able to maintain balance and really create enough strength and power to lift the weight we're trying to lift. Now, if we're elevating the heel and we're creating a very forward knee position, what tends to happen in the deadlift is that our hips are then gonna sink. If we sink our hips, we're gonna lose out on some of the tension we can create in the hamstrings and glutes, which we all know can then limit our power off the floor with the deadlift and just screw up sequencing. Generally, you'll see folks who have their hips way too low in the deadlift, they'll shoot up and then they'll do that weird deadlift where their hips come up and then they'll finish the lift. We don't obviously want to do that. We want to have the knees and hips moving in some level of harmonious nature in our deadlift. So if we elevate the heel, create a slightly more forward knee translation, and sink the hips, we're going to basically be putting ourselves into what would be a suboptimal position before we even start pulling the weight. Now, what's interesting to consider with all of this is that shorter and taller lifters will experience slightly different things. If you're a taller lifter, you likely already experienced some forward knee translation when you're deadlifting. Like myself, I have really long femurs and shins, so my knees naturally come a bit more forward than what is traditionally taught with a deadlift. Shorter lifters, you may not experience as much forward knee translation. However, that doesn't mean that one is necessarily worse than the other. It just means that how we are built will be slightly different when we elevate the heel, but at the end of the day, if we're putting ourselves into any form of position that we are not able to clear the knees really well, maintain balance over the midfoot when deadlifting, and create tension in the posterior, so the glutes and the hamstrings, while also driving to the floor in the deadlift, then weightlifting shoes will be suboptimal. And that's also just why I don't recommend them for lifters who are not weightlifting focused athletes. But now let's dive into reason number three. The third reason is the feet. So when we think about the recreational lifter, I think one of the areas in the body that gets overlooked in a lot of ways is the foot and all of the musculature that makes up the foot. And having a strong foot position and the ability to really root them into the ground is a skill within itself that needs to be practiced. So by lifting with a flatter heel to toe drop and less stack height in your shoe, so basically using flatter shoes for deadlifts, I think you could create a better means of really gripping the floor and creating a nice harmonious balance when pulling the weight, because you have a better means to do so. So when you're breaking the floor, you are able to really grip the floor, create a nice balanced position, and then drive into the ground with those feet in that more leg press-like fashion when we are breaking the floor. And I think that's really important to understand, especially across other lifts, because when we are doing other bilateral lifts where we are trying to really root the feet, doing this in the deadlift will help create a little bit of carryover there. Now do note, again, for weightlifting focused athletes, This is not really for you because your shoes are again sport specific, but for the recreational lifter, having the ability and creating the skill of rooting the feet into the ground through a means of having a flatter shoe or even lifting barefoot here and there, I think is a skill within itself that often gets overlooked by a lot of lifters. So now the question is what should we wear instead? So 3 really great options that I often recommend is number 1, Converse. They have a very flat heel to toe drop. They don't have that much material that separates your foot from the ground. And this is why a lot of powerlifters will reach for Converse when training for their lifts, especially in the deadlift. Another good option is just your recreational cross trainer. Generally, cross trainers are gonna have heel to toe drops that range between 0 millimeters and 8 millimeters. Now, obviously 6 to 8 is a bit on the higher end, but for most lifters, that's not gonna be the biggest deal. And for a lot of lifters, the 4 millimeters that comes along with the standard cross trainers, so like in our Nike Metcons and our Reebok Nanos, those are gonna be just fine for most lifters. That heel to toe drop is pretty minimal in nature, and the outsoles are stable, and so are the midsoles. So there's really not that much material that separates the foot from the ground. A third option is just trying out barefoot lifting here and there. So wearing socks, going barefoot. Now do note, like if you're in a commercial gym, like don't be weird and gross and have your bare feet all over. But if you have the availability to do so, I think it's a fun means of lifting and just learning the skill again of really gripping and rooting the feet into the ground. But those are 3 options, and I've actually written on the best cross trainers for deadlifts. So if you are a more cross training or functional fitness athlete, if you're looking for a shoe that can support heavy deadlifts, I've written an article. It is linked down below, including my 5 favorite models. But that wraps up this video, guys. Again, my weightlifting focused athletes, like this video is not for you. This is more for the recreational lifter who has been training weightlifting shoes with their deadlifts and doesn't understand why it's likely suboptimal for their performance, especially in the long run. But guys, as always, if you have any questions on this video, hit me down below. And as always, drop a like to the video, subscribe to the channel. I'll see you guys in the next one.